Need a psychotropic dick monster for your next D&D campaign? Great. You've come to the right place. Stick around till the end and then... Oh. You don't want a psychotropic dick monster for your game. Well, stick around to the end anyways, honestly, because this is such a ridiculous movie concept and you're gonna want to hear about it. Today we're looking at Brain Damage, a 1988 horror comedy that deals with some heavy topics in a real comical way. The film follows Brian as he copes with his new friend Ailmer and all the crazy shenanigans they get into. Boy howdy, it's a hoot. So let's explore Brain Damage and its smooth-talking, hallucinogenic secreting, brain-eating, penis-looking parasite. Never thought I'd write a line like that, and it's only been 7 episodes. This is what I want for my life. Starting out with some flashy lightning before cutting to a bunch of African sculptures and anatomy pictures that have nothing to do with the movie at all, we get introduced to the parents, air quotes here, of Elmer, the movie's antagonist, Morris and Martha. Yeah, he looks like a Morris with his liquid pain book. Morris laments that the meat he purchased was so tiny, but Martha don't give a shit. She wants to feed her baby Ailmer some sweet little monkey brains. Heading to the bathroom, Martha discovers Ailmer is gone and oh god, oh no, the brains, what a waste. Honestly, she hams up this freak out and it is just wonderful. Go for it, Martha. They ransack the house in search for Elmer, Martha giving up and just having a meltdown on the kitchen floor. Lucille St. Peter plays Martha, and this woman is a saint. Like, look at the effort she's putting in to this film. They start going door to door in search of Ailmer. They first stop by a sassy black woman. She's very sassy. Then we get introduced to our protagonist Brian, as well as his girlfriend Barb and brother Mike. I'm getting real Taxi Driver vibes from Mike. Right? Brian, woken by Barbara, is suffering from some sort of illness and opts to not go to a concert they had plans to go to that night. Instead, sending Mike with Barb. Mike, who's real creepy. Honestly, I can't say it enough. He's creepy and he's coming for your girl, Brian. As they leave, we see Morris and Martha's front door fading into it to see them foaming at the mouth. Back to Brian, who wakes up covered in blood, dizzy, delirious, and suffering from hallucinations of porta potty water and a giant eye in the ceiling. Eventually, he tries to inspect the wound on his neck, seeing that the bathtub is full, and thinking that he's not alone in the house, calls for the person to show themselves. And thus we meet Ailmer. And holy hell is he creepy in a murderous Mr. Rogers kind of way. Elmer pitches to Brian that his life will be amazing if he just listens to the lights as he wiggles around in a bucket of water. John Zachary voices Elmer and he really nails it with his soft and warm voice. It makes Elmer so unsettling. And he also kind of sounds like the snowman from those old stop-motion Rudolph the Red-Nosed Reindeer movies.
I'll do all your thinking for you. Just put me on the back of your neck and everything will be fine. Well, you might not believe it, but the world almost missed Christmas.
Brian agrees to take Ailmer for a walk so he can eat, and we get to see how Ailmer is the cause of the strange hallucinations via the blue Gatorade that we saw earlier. Barbara and Mike return home to check on Brian, rather inebriated, and find him gone. And where is Brian? Well, tripping balls running through the streets.
Oh my god, wow!
Yeah, you go, Brian, you go. Well, not too much here. You're gonna attract the attention of a slow-moving security guard. This night watchman clearly has murder on the mind. When the night watchman detains Brian and pats him down, Elmer goes in for the kill, boring into his brain. So many phallic references here. We also get this scene. So unsettling. This creepy little dick monster just stop-motion chewing on some brains. This outfit is so delightfully 80s. We get a small time jump that showcases Brian has really gone down the rabbit hole with the blue porta potty water. Multiple locks on his door and the bathroom door, and reclusive behavior. Barbara arrives to remind him that they have a date that night, and this happens.
Sure, I'll be right up.
It's a not so subtle nod to a certain activity.
Things are getting really weird around here.
You don't say. Establishing shot. Brian manages to make it to the day where he tells Barbara about his highs, essentially. Side note, Barbara, what's this outfit and this hair and this makeup? Come on, girl. You can do better. When Brian tries to explain his relationship with Ailmer, he gets pains as Ailmer wants to keep his existence a secret. Brian, hallucinating, freaks out and leaves poor Barb to eat old dry spaghetti and meatballs alone. Seriously, they were the driest looking spaghetti and meatballs I've ever seen. Never fear though, while the Italian food might have been dry, a random club girl's brain is properly moist. After a short dance sequence, Brian gets pulled outside by said random club girl and makes such a witty pun.
Feels
like you got a real monster in there.
As she descends to do the deed, Elmer, I choose you. I don't know, but I definitely have to blur this entire scene. This scene was actually cut from the original VHS release, and most of the crew refused to work on it. Brian comes into an alleyway, disrobes, and removes his brain-filled tighty-whities before he gets found by Morris, who clearly didn't die. We learn the origin of Ailmer's name and his history, which reaches back to the Fourth Crusade. Brian learns of the murders from Morris and decides to leave, and pseudo-explains what's happening to Mike before he departs, stopping to stay at a real skeezy motel. Brian drops Ailmer in a sink and questions him, asking if what Morris said was true. Ailmer displays some real manipulative behavior before Brian says he can't remember what happened the night before.
I don't remember where I went or who I met or what I did. All I remember is feeling something sticky in my pants and then finding them covered in blood.
We've all been there, Brian. We've all been there. Ailmer discloses that he eats brains before Brian tells him that he needs to be in control, but first he needs to detox from Ailmer's sweet, sweet blue juice. As Brian detoxes, he's taunted by Ailmer and goes through symptoms typical in a heroin detox, well, minus this. Okay, it was a hallucination. Brian, finally foaming at the mouth before passing out, wakes up to Ailmer singing. Honestly, this scene of him begging for Ailmer's juice is very unsettling and really, really dark.
In the old way and in the old time, the hurdy-gurdies, the birdies, the crop on the feed, the candy.
Giving into the addiction, Brian chooses to bring Ailmer a victim, finding an overly jacked dude in the shower. I just gotta point out, this is a really odd cut. Brian, heading into the shower, releases Ailmer, and it kinda looks like he drops a deuce. Ailmer, however, avoids the jack dude and goes after a person who actually is dropping a deuce. Now that's too far, okay? You don't attack a man while he's on the throne. However, this blood splatter is pretty amazing looking and quite comical. There's just something real funny about it. I rewatched it probably like 4 or 5 times. Brian, giving up, returns home and crawls in the bed, followed by Barbara and Mike returning home. Mike is just so creepy, but apparently Barb's into it because it's time for some 80s coitus. Can't show it, but trust me, it's there. Brian creepily just sits there in his bed and listens to it until Ailmer shows up and gets him good and high. And Brian has a weird threesome dream where he's got tentacles and suction cups on his stomach or something and then eats Barbara's brain. Brian wakes up Barbara and Mike, telling them they need to leave, explaining the whole symbiotic relationship. Naturally, they don't believe him, and as he leaves, Barbara gives chase, following him into a subway, where she witnesses Brian get high before getting on the train. Barbara kind of looks more like a junkie than he does here. Feel bad talking shit about Barbara, though. She tries to talk to him, and he seems to be holding Ailmer back from eating her. Side note, Ailmer has never naturally been inside of him this whole time. He's always been external, so I don't really know what this coming out of the mouth thing is, but it looks quirky. We also get this little basket case nod, another film written by Frank Henenlotter. And as the basket guy creeps away, Barbara goes in for the kiss. And, well, that's that. Ailmer eats her brains. Hey, he warned you. A brain is a brain. I love the subtle nod that no one gives a shit on a New York subway, even though there's very clearly a dead body. Returning home, Brian gets held at gunpoint by Morris and Martha, so they can retake Ailmer. Very persistent elderly couple. But Ailmer ain't having none of that, and he goes for Martha's geriatric brain. He kind of looks like a Nope, not even gonna say it. Brian witnesses Ailmer do the same to Morris, and upon seeing the actual kill, Ailmer tells Brian to place him on his neck to deal with the trauma, but he's attacked by a not quite dead Morris. Morris, grabbing Ailmer, squeezes him so hard that he injects Brian with a crazy dose of the juice and kills Ailmer in the process. Brian's brain, overloaded with the juice, grows this strange bubble on his head, and he starts leaking the blue liquid himself. He grabs the hand cannon that Morris had and goes upstairs and tries to self-delete. The cops arrive and hear a gunshot, and when they enter the room, Brian's there with his skull open and glowing bright light before finally shooting electricity up into the sky, and then we cut to credits because that's how you end a movie with a weird parasitic dick monster. So what is Ailmer? Well, it's a town in Ontario, Canada, but that's not really interesting at all. Really though, it isn't explained in the film, but it doesn't mean we can't try to fuse a bunch of animals on Earth and make this weird little dickish nightmare. So what do we know? Well, we know he's been around for a couple centuries based on Morris's description. Ailmer first arrived on Earth during the time of the Fourth Crusade, so he's very long-lived. He eats brains, he secretes a hallucinogenic substance, and has a smooth jazz voice that helps him hide his savage and manipulative nature. There are 3 major components to Ailmer we need to look at: his eating habits, his body, and the hallucinogen he secretes. At first my brain, see what I did there? Went to the brain-eating amoeba, Niglaria fowleri. These scientific names, I'm gonna get them one day. That doesn't work, however, since we're dealing with a multicellular organism, one that looks like a phallus. You'd think trying to find something comparable on Earth would be difficult for this one, but you'd be wrong.
Wrong.
On Earth, we have no multicellular organisms that strictly feast on brains, but the pork tapeworm can find a way to the human brain and make it a little snack. Also, it kind of looks like a dick. One thing of note, Ailmer isn't truly a parasite. It can move freely and it doesn't need a host to survive. The host just increases its odds of finding food. And while the pork tapeworm does not produce any hallucinogens, there are plenty of other animals that do so, such as toads, frogs, and some fish. And wouldn't you know it, the ocean gifts us with a pretty solid candidate for a dick-shaped hallucinogen-producing creature in the sea sponge. Not all of them produce a hallucinogen, but there's at least 5 that produce DMT. You know what you shouldn't do? Eat sea sponges. Don't do that. What you should do, though, is subscribe to the channel and like and share the video. All your friends should know about a drug-dealing dick monster. Dimethyltryptamine is a psychedelic drug. DMT has a rapid onset, intense effects, and relatively short duration, unlike LSD or psilocybin. For those reasons, it used to be called the business trip drug back in the 60s. You crazy hippies and your drug names. While LSD and psilocybin take longer to kick in, they produce a longer-lasting effect very similar to the juice. So maybe it's a fusion of the two. But the juice is also highly addictive, and according to some studies, DMT, LSD, and psilocybin are not addictive if used sparingly. However, MDMA is. MDMA increases the release of dopamine, norepinephrine, and serotonin. And you know what the flip side of a big high is? A low low. The after effects of the drug leave the user feeling irritable, depressed, having sleeping problems, anxiety, memory, and attention problems, explaining how Brian is unable to remember the nightly activities. The withdrawals from the juice are reminiscent to that of heroin withdrawals, but with a much greater scale and severity. And that's saying something. With typical symptoms such as vomiting, body aches, cravings, mood changes, and in this case, seizures. They also seem to last much longer than heroin withdrawals, which last up to about 7 days. And finally, in high doses, the juice also seems to unlock some weird other dimensional plane of existence in the brain. I don't know, what the hell was that white light? You tell me. So we have a hallucinogen-generating tapeworm that eats brains. But what the hell can this become if it's brought to the tabletop? Ah, the Ailmer. A strange creature indeed, not quite sure where they come from, but they are a menace. They're small, not much more than a foot long and blue with dagger-like teeth. Not even that tough to kill, but that's not what makes them scary. You see, the Ailmer, they're smart. Just one can come into a town on the back of its host and wipe it clean in no more than a week. You know one's been around. They prefer the brains. They're like illithids. The most important thing about dealing with the Ailmer is to avoid its proboscis. It's got some kind of fluid in there. That's how they enslave you. Once you're on their juice, there ain't no saving you. Anyway, good luck, adventurers. Don't go losing your mind now. The Ailmer, a tiny aberration. It's neutral evil with an AC of 10, 20 hit points, and a movement speed of 20, and that's probably being generous. It's great at deception, performance, and persuasion. And it does have damaging vulnerabilities to bludgeoning. It speaks literally any language more or less, save for like Abyssal and things along those lines, with a challenge rating of 1/4. Its abilities are Hapless Host and Bright Lights. I'll get back into Bright Lights in 1 second, but Hapless Host sees the Ailmer using its host as a shield. While bound to its host, the Ailmer gains 15 AC, and all attacks against it have disadvantage. Its basic attack is a bite attack. Its secondary attack is called Injection, where it injects you with a poison, and the player is stricken with Bright Lights. Bright Lights be used twice a day. The Ailmer's fluid infests your mind, warping your reality. On turn, the player must roll a d20. On even rolls, the player may take an action but has disadvantage, and on odd rolls, the player is lost in the delirium for the entire turn. When making the monster, I kinda just thought, it's squishy and it's soft, it's easy to kill. How do you make this a real threat? And the threat comes in the fact that it can take over a number of hosts. So if you really wanted to, it could take over a kobold or it could take over a dragon. And you have to fight through that before you can even kill the Ailmer, unless you get lucky on your rolls. I had seen this movie so many times when searching for something to watch, but it never interested me. In the realm of great 80s horror, this just seemed bland, but holy shit was I wrong. This film, while a horror comedy, deals with some pretty heavy topics such as drug use and hypersexualization. A lot of the comedy elements are fused with the genuine grotesqueness of Ailmer himself. John Zachary, as mentioned before, voiced Ailmer, and he really does steal the show. Sadly, he passed away in 2016. After years of dodging this film, I personally cannot recommend it enough, but it must be watched with the deleted scenes included. The film loses some of its personality without the over-the-top shock horror elements. I mean, after all, what movie is not complete with a fellatio gag? Anyways, that's all for now.